Hello, and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk with immigration attorney and estate planning attorney Brian D. Lerner. In this particular episode, I'd like to talk about the marital deduction and the marital deduction trust and when it's used and how it's used. There's probably anyone who has touched a living trust has heard something or another either about the marital deduction or they've heard about estate taxes, and you're probably wondering what one has to do with the other. How does it interrelate, and what's the purpose of the marital deduction? Well, let me tell you. Let me give you an example. First of all, let me tell you that the estate tax is about $5.3 million. So, for the most part, a lot of people will never have to pay an estate tax because the property itself never gets up to the point of value for the estate tax to kick in. But you never know. It used to be a lot less, and maybe in the future there'll be some congressional movement that basically says we need to get more money for the IRS. Let's way lower this estate tax, or let's put a ton of different exceptions in there. Whatever it might be, it would be worth your while, even if your property doesn't come to the value of the estate being under the estate tax. You never know what might happen, and also, even now, let's say you just have 50% of that. Let's say there's a couple buildings and some real property and some personal property, and let's say it just comes to maybe half of what is required. Maybe by time either you die or your spouse dies, maybe the amount of that will in fact be higher than the required estate tax threshold, so that the amount of tax could be prohibitive. I mean, imagine, for example, that you add up all your property, real, personal, everything, and let's say now it's 2.5 million, and let's say you die, okay, and you just devise the property to your wife, but don't use the marital deduction. Or let's say you don't devise it to your wife. Say you devise it to different people, and you let your wife, for example, use it throughout her life, and it's not done properly. And let's say 30 years later your wife dies, and let's say then the property is worth 6.5 million. I mean, who knows? Then the people who are going to get that property are going to be hit hard with the estate tax, and they're probably going to wish that you had done something to relieve that hardship, because you've worked so hard to get the property your whole life. What would be the use of it? All just disappears and dissipates at the time that it actually moves on to whoever you bequeathed it to. So what the marital deduction does is, when you die or when your spouse dies, if that property in one way or another is bequeathed to you, okay, to a spouse, then the fair market value of that property, no matter how expensive it is, does not fall under the federal estate tax laws, and it actually subtracts from what it is that you might owe. So let me just use a round figure. Let's say you have a house worth $1 million. Okay, if it's not done properly, then once you would die, then you have the $1 million towards the threshold of 5.3 million, which means you still need to get another $4.3 million in which to meet that threshold, but that's 4.3 million, not 5.3. Now, if the property is properly put into the marital deduction trust, once you would die, then that $1 million property does not deduct from what you would owe. It essentially gets a free ride, no taxes whatsoever under estate tax law. I mean, there might be other taxes, but not under estate tax law, um, in order to avoid that in the future. So it's well worth it when you see an attorney, an estate planning attorney, that they properly get the necessary property within the marital deduction or another type of trust that will qualify for the marital deduction, so that it does not get taxed. So, for example, even a Q-tip, where it ultimately goes to your kids, but your wife essentially, or your husband, who's ever still residing. I just say wife first because for the most of the time it's the husband who dies first. But um, whoever is remaining can stay in the marital deduction for their property actually go to